It is Valentine's Day and love is in the air. So let's give our hearts to some of our favorite free agent targets that we want the Chicago Bears to fall in love with.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook, join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk, and make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. On the show today, we start to put together our Chicago Bears free agent wish list, and we use the Valentine's Day holiday as an excuse and a theme to kind of pair this matching play Cupid a little bit with the Bears and some of these guys currently set to hit the free agent market. We'll start with some key defensive linemen that are pretty easy to fall head over heels for. Some offensive players, both playmakers and, pass protectors that certainly can take our hearts. And we'll wrap up with a sneaky position here that we haven't talked a lot about this offseason and that I don't see a lot of people talking a lot about, but maybe we should give our heart to some linebackers, a spot where the Bears might need multiple players here as you build out this defense throughout the offseason. It's important to remember that Valentine's Day, today we're recording this for February 14th. We're still 29 days, I believe, away from the start of free agency or the tampering period, 29, 30 days right around there. And in that time, some of these players will re-sign with their team or be franchise tagged and one way or another not be available for the Chicago Bears. But I say, in the spirit of Valentine's Day, let's fall blindly in love with these guys. Let's get our hopes up, because I think it's better to have loved a free agent and lost the opportunity to sign them than to have never loved them at all and to not get excited about what this team could do with all the salary cap space they have this offseason. I think the Valentine free agent at the top of every Bears fan list, or most lists, is going to be Daron Payne, the defensive tackle from the Washington Commanders, former Alabama nose tackle who really grew into his own this season, had a career-high 11 sacks, had always been very good for them, but made the Pro Bowl for the first time this year, a dynamic pairing on that defensive line, and would be a huge addition for this Bears defensive line. Still 25 years old, turns 26 this offseason, has a very bright future, feels like he's still getting into his prime, and would be a great opportunity for the Bears to bring him in. Now, you've also heard me say on this podcast before that people around the Washington Commanders don't expect him to hit free agency, that they'll clear up enough cap space to re-sign him, whether that be releasing Carson Wentz. And there's also some thoughts about which guys on their own defensive line they might not see as long-term pieces in the future that they don't have to earmark money for, so they can give that money to Daron Payne. And I'm not sure that he's going to be an option for the Bears. But we can certainly send our Valentine love his way and hope for the opportunity to sign him to this Bears defensive line, because boy, would that be fun to watch. Another guy who would be really fun to watch on this defensive line, a guy we just saw in the Super Bowl this past weekend, Javon Hargrave from the Philadelphia Eagles. Another guy, career-high 11 sacks this season, really came into his own. I mean, he made the Pro Bowl last year too, so he's been a steady, proven, productive player, not only in Philadelphia in the 4-3 defense, but played some nose tackle in the 3-4 in Pittsburgh before that, has even played some of the 5 technique defensive end, a truly versatile defensive line player who's been consistently productive for many years of his career. I mean, every year of his career, and doesn't have durability questions or anything like that. He is a little bit on the older side. He just turned 30 last week. Not a great birthday present to lose the Super Bowl, but still, he's on the older side. So, might be a little bit of a shorter term piece as far as not a guy that's going to be here 5 years from now, but might he be here for a couple of very, very good seasons before things maybe start to trail off there. And if Payne's not available and Hargrave is, you're still going to get a really, really good player, a guy whose nickname is Gravedigger. I think any guy that gets the nickname Gravedigger has a spot on my defensive line. But, we'd prefer Deron Payne if you had to kind of choose one and the price is similar. You take the younger guy with, I think, a little bit more, long-term proposition there. Or you want to kick out to the edge rusher. I think the guy that takes the cake for me in that regard is Marcus Davenport from the New Orleans Saints, a guy that I think could be some really good sneaky value despite being, one of the top options in free agency, because he's coming off of a season where he had a career low 0.5 sacks. So that might keep his value low, but he had 9 sacks last season and has had 6 sacks earlier in his career. And across the board, if you look at each of his 5 years in the NFL, he has averaged roughly the same pass rush winning percentage. His sacks go up, down, up, down, up, down, but he's getting pressure and he's beating opposing offensive lines at pretty much the same rate every year. The only difference is how often that pass rush ends at the quarterback, but he's consistently winning his rushes and generating pressure at a very similar rate. So I'm all in on buying low when the sack number happens to be low, because so often the sack number is not something the pass rusher can fully control. They have some control over it, but some of it is how quickly the quarterback gets rid of the ball. And so I'm all in on Marcus Davenport as a guy who you can still get very good production for and not have to pay a guy who's coming off of an 11-sack season. Rotate him in on your edge and really have him thrive in this defensive line. You start moving your way down a little bit more. I'll throw in Dalvin Tomlinson just as another backup plan. Like if Payne stays in Washington and Hargrave ends up staying with the Philadelphia Eagles, which we'll kind of see what their plan is from here. I mean, Tomlinson's another one of these veterans who's been around the NFL, has played in multiple schemes. You kind of know what he is and isn't. At this stage of his career, the Giants and now the Minnesota Vikings, like he's very good, but he's not a pass rushing specialist by any means. He's a big butt kicking, run stuffing nose tackle who can make some plays here and there, and you'd be happy with him solidifying that middle of this Bears defense and being that pair for Justin Jones or maybe even Jalen Carter. In true Valentine's Day fashion, there's always the old flame option, Larry Ogunjobi. Go back to the lover that spurned you, or I guess the Bears kind of spurned him, I guess. But for whatever reason, it didn't work out with the foot injury. And I guess it's sort of the Bears spurning him, but it was also him not having a healthy foot. So, Ryan Poles fell in love with Larry Ogunjobi last offseason and was ready to pay him. Is he ready to fall back in love with Larry Ogunjobi as a free agent target? Or you kind of let that one go and don't go back to the ex or the one that got away and just kind of move on with your life? We'll see how the Bears want to approach that one. But we should see a lot of money doled out this offseason. A lot of it going to be on defense, but there's some guys on offense too that I think are worth some real investment here. So we'll look at some of the offensive free agents that the Bears might fall in love with this offseason as we look ahead on Valentine's Day next on Locked On Bears. This episode of the Locked On Bears podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp is online therapy made easy and accessible. If you've been thinking about trying out online therapy, you got to give BetterHelp a try because it's really a great option. It's convenient, it's flexible, it's affordable, and of course, entirely online. So there's no commuting, there's no waiting in a waiting room, there's no, sitting around and trying to work like all the kind of doctor's office-y type stuff. No, you do it from the comfort of your own home. I do online therapy from the comfort of my own home. It's a really important part of my mental health regimen. And I like to say, just as I go to the gym to try and take care of my body, I go to therapy to try and take care of my mind. It's not about being at a crisis point. It's not about, an emergency, everything falling apart, but it's about being your best and feeling your best. So if you want to live a more empowered life, therapy can get you there. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Okay, so if we're falling in love with free agent targets this Valentine's Day, I think it's easier to have that sort of like butterfly in your stomach, exciting feeling about some of the players on the offensive side of the ball, right? We think about Saquon Barkley as, the popular kid that that you see and you're like, oh man, is that really realistic for me and for this team, like, I don't know. I don't know if a player like that would go for a guy like me, right? Because, he's going to be worth a lot of money in free agency. And you also wonder, is it something that the Bears want to invest that much money in? It's also worth noting that people around the New York Giants organization don't expect him to hit free agency, that they might be a little far apart on numbers right now, but the franchise tag still sits there. And depending on what they want to do with Daniel Jones, there's a good chance the Bears don't have the opportunity to even sign a guy like Saquon Barkley. And I'm kind of the belief that I wouldn't go after Barkley at this stage of the Bears process. I can see how exciting he would be in this offense and how much fun it would be to have him in Chicago. But I was again reminded, you saw that there's a chart that was going around Twitter the other day of all the Super Bowl winning teams of the last decade and how much salary they're paying running backs. And no Super Bowl winning team has been paying a running back more than like $2 million that Super Bowl season for their lead running back. That's not to say that you can't win if you pay a running back, but the teams that have won have not paid running backs, and it's certainly not the kind of price tag that Saquon Barkley would be getting on the open market, but it's easy to fall in love with, and I encourage you to fall in love with him as a free agent target who could be so exciting with him and Justin Fields in this Bears offense. The weapon that I get a little more excited about, and I would feel like is a better value and a better fit, is the tight end Evan Ingram from the Jacksonville Jaguars, because he's such a different style of tight end than Cole Kmet, and I just think he would offer you so much more. That this is a year when we talk about the free agent class not really being very strong at wide receiver. It's Jacoby Myers, it's Juju Smith-Schuster, DJ Chark, Odell Beckham, I think is, but that's not really realistic for the Bears. So why don't we go get the tight end who plays like a wide receiver and is coming off of a career best 766 yard season, 73 catches, 4 touchdowns in Jacksonville. The Jaguars kind of showed why he was a first-round pick by the Giants and showed all the things the Giants weren't doing with him properly, of like how to use a big-bodied move tight end like that I think would just give the Bears a nice pairing with Cole Kmet, kind of like Jimmy Graham, just not with Matt Nagy running that offense, right? Like he's not that Evan Ingram is Jimmy Graham caliber by any means, but right, that style of tight end pairing and being a little bit smarter with it and having a younger guy in that role that is ascending, still age 28, and kind of getting into the prime of his career and looking like a guy that was more worthy of that 23rd overall pick than what we saw in New York, where they weren't really sure how to properly put a tight end weapon into that spot. And I think a guy like Luke Getsy could certainly find good use for somebody like Evan Ingram, who kind of proved his concept this season in that offense. A couple of offensive linemen, the big uglies that don't always get enough love. Certainly Orlando Brown from the Kansas City Chiefs is going to be towards the top of the list or at the top of the list for a lot of Chicago Bears fans. I mean, big franchise left tackle that can just absolutely lock down Justin Fields' blindside, or, he kind of refused to play right tackle in Baltimore, so you'd probably then move Braxton Jones to right tackle, but still just get the good player and let it work. It's also going to be a $20+ million contract per year. That's the kind of market you're looking at for somebody like Orlando Brown Jr., and the Bears do have a lot of needs to fill there as well. That's why I would be more inclined to give my Valentine to Mike McGlinchey if you're looking at an offensive tackle or really an offensive lineman in general that you want to add to this Bears team. McGlinchey is more the natural right tackle anyway. I don't really want to move Braxton Jones over to that spot if I can avoid it. The less offensive line movement I have to do, the better. And McGlinchey is a plug-and-play, strong bully of a right tackle who's really good and worth every penny that he's going to go for this offseason. And sounds like he's interested in hitting the free agent market and kind of testing out what that value is going to be. And I just feel like with a guy like McGlinchey, you're going to spend a significant amount less. I think he's projected more in like the $10 to $12 million a year range, whereas Orlando Brown is up closer to like 20. And I don't know how much of a bigger impact those guys are going to have comparatively on your team, and one is a lot cheaper, so I'll take the right tackle and save a little money and still get a very, very good football player. I also want to continue our theme of with the Valentine's Day stuff and going back to a previous lover like Ryan Poles with Larry Ogunjobi. How about Luke Getsy's ex, Alan Lazard, at wide receiver? Not a number one, but you acknowledge that there's not really a number one wide receiver on the free agent market that's a true number one. And you can still use more players, more wide receivers in this offense besides Claypool and Mooney that you actually really like. Like, we don't need Equanimeous St. Brown playing offensive snaps this season. Alan Lazard, big, strong, downfield weapon, like everything you wanted Equanimeous St. Brown to be, but just like stronger and better. And of course, all the familiarity in the world with Getsy. Coached his position, coached him in the offense, would know the scheme, plug and play option there. And I wonder, do the Bears go back to the familiar love that Getsy had in a free agent there, or do they say, now we've got our former Packers wide receiver on the roster, we don't need another number 3, maybe number 2 type in Lazard when you already have guys like Claypool and Mooney that are also not number 1 receivers, so why bother investing another decent-sized contract in one of those receivers when you're going to be likely paying Darnell Mooney this offseason and probably paying Chase Claypool at some point in the near future as well. So we'll see if the old flame can get rekindled there or if the Bears opt to go somewhere else. I still think generally we're going to see the majority of the free agent money invested in defense because there are more holes there and more significant holes in that spot and a lot more turnover I'm expecting on that side of the ball. So we'll talk about a position next that we haven't heard much about this offseason. No one's talking about how big of a need linebacker still is on this team and how important that will be toward this team moving forward. So we'll go through some of the free agent options in that regard and why that might be a better fit for the Bears than trying to draft and develop somebody else at that position next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is powered by Built Bar, the world's best tasting protein bars ever, because Built Bars are a delicious treat that don't come with all the fat and calories of candy and other sweets that you might have that craving for. Because every Built Bar is, first of all, soft and easy to chew, covered in 100% real chocolate. To me, they taste just like candy bars, but they're all low sugar, low calorie, high fiber, and high protein. We're just seriously talking 130 calories and 4 grams of sugar with a whopping 17 grams of protein. And they come in a bunch of great flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, coconut almond, raspberry, cookies and cream, and so much more. We've been telling you about how you can get Built Bars online at Built.com, but now you can get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club as well. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart today, and over in the pharmacy section, you can find the boxes of Built Bars. You can grab a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, which I currently have in my pantry. They also got double chocolate and the coconut puffs at Walmart. Or if you're close to a Sam's Club, run in and grab a 13-bar box of their hit flavors, brownie batter and churro. Both of those are 2 of my favorites. I have brownie batter right now also in my pantry. I eat one literally every single day. You got to try them for yourself. Trust me, you'll thank me later. I know there's so much love for Jack Sanborn, and I have been Jack Sanborn's biggest fan since the Bears signed him as an undrafted free agent. I have met Jack Sanborn in person. I have interviewed Jack Sanborn. He is a nice human being who I am personally rooting for and think he has a bright future in the NFL. But it's also important to acknowledge that Jack Sanborn started 6 games last season and played in 14 overall, but really had like substantive playing time in like 7-ish, sort of like 6 starts and then like 2 half games in there. So really more like 6.5-ish games of playing time that we actually saw Jack Sanborn on the field for last year. In those 6.5 games, he was very good, very exciting, and a guy to be very encouraged about. But do you go into 2023 saying, yeah, that undrafted free agent that we saw for 6.5 games, he's our guaranteed bona fide starter for the long-term future. No questions asked, no competition. He's our guy. Not sure if I'm quite there yet. Not because I don't think Sanborn could be good, but because we've seen players have great 6-game stretches before and hit a sophomore slump. Teams get some tape on them. They don't quite keep up. They're not able to advance their game well enough, and they flame out a little bit. I don't expect Sanborn to fully flame out by any means, but I do want to be prepared with the linebacker position. And I think ideally, I enter 2023 where Jack Sanborn is my number 3 linebacker. In base defense, he's on the field. He's a starter when you have your 4-3 front out there. But when you go into the nickel and you bring that 5th defensive back in the field, I would like to have, ideally, 2 better linebackers on the field on those snaps. And with Nick Morrow being a free agent, that might mean bringing in 2 more outside linebackers, or 2 more linebackers from outside the organization. Maybe that becomes too big of a burden and you make Sanborn one of those 2 guys and you live with it. I'm okay with that. It's not the end of the world. But ideally, when you have this much cap space and the possibility of adding even more draft capital, trading down for number 1, I'd like to have two better linebacker starters in my nickel defense and still have Sanborn there as a luxury and as a guy that love to be able to play. And if I have to play him, I'm feeling pretty good about it, but not having to rely on him no matter what happens. And so you look around free agency, I think a guy like Tremaine Edmonds from the Buffalo Bills as a former first-round pick in the same draft class as Roquan Smith. And I remember in that draft class, there was like legitimate debate. Who should be taken first, Tremaine Edmonds or Roquan Smith? And eventually everyone kind of settled on Roquan Smith, and their careers have played out that way. But we saw, especially this past season, Edmonds had kind of a little bit of a bounce back. It seems like the game is starting to slow down for him. He's missing fewer tackles. He's reacting more quickly and not just running around the field like a chicken with his head cut off. And I think, if you have to replace a guy like Roquan Smith this offseason with someone who's almost as fast, but 6'5" and 250, you love the physical tools there and feel like, between the ears, the game is slowing down from him and he's getting it right at this stage of his career. I don't think he's going to be that crazy expensive given some of the struggles he's had. I mean, he made the Pro Bowl earlier in his career, so it's not like he was a total bum until this season and all of a sudden, he'll be super, super cheap to go out and get. But I don't know that you're going to have to totally break the bank. He's going to be more in that like middle class of linebackers, and that could be exciting as a young player to grow in this defense moving forward. Another first-round pick that had high expectations, I believe it was the same draft class as well, but drafted right around that same pick. I think they were just a few picks apart. Leighton Vander Esch from the Dallas Cowboys, another one of these like Valentine linebackers that I think could be exciting to see in this Bears defense. Another one of these linebackers, like his rookie year, he was a Pro Bowler. It might have been like second team All-Pro. It was in the Defensive Rookie of the Year conversation. I don't think he won it, but I don't remember who for sure won it that season. But regardless, a super big, strong, fast, freak athlete linebacker who then had a couple of injury seasons and seemed to kind of fall out of favor there and just had some real struggles getting his career back on track. And it felt like this past season in Dallas was a little bit of a bounce back for him too. Like he's starting to get it. These linebackers get to this stage where they start out strong, teams catch up to them, and then they have to do some catching back up, and then they're kind of in the groove of things for there. And I feel like he and Edmonds are both kind of hitting that groove stage of their careers right now. And I think Vander Esch even would be a little cheaper than Edmonds, and I think I'd prefer Edmonds at this stage of their careers. But I feel like there's a lot of upside there, a lot of physical tools that you can't teach, and guys that would be really good fits athletically in this Bears defense. I also got to shout out the other Wisconsin linebacker who was available this year, TJ Edwards from the Philadelphia Eagles. Mahomes got him a few times in the Super Bowl, put him in some tough spots, but Mahomes does that to a lot of linebackers. And Edwards was really good this season, had a great season for them. A guy that Philadelphia might not ultimately let hit the free agent market, but a guy that is tough, physical, instinctive, has a lot of similarities to Sanborn, where there were questions about whether he would be athletic enough to be a starter in the NFL, and that's kind of why he went undrafted. And he hasn't proven to be like some elite athlete out of nowhere, but he's so smart and instinctive that he reacts quicker and diagnoses the play quicker to make up for perhaps the lack of speed. Like where guys like Edmonds and Vander Esch and Roquan Smith can just get there faster, and Nick Morrow, because they're just fast, Edwards will see it a step sooner, so he can get a little bit of a head start, and maybe they get there at the same time, but he gets there despite being a slower player. And that's what I like about a guy like Edwards, and he's really sort of found his groove in how to be successful given his own limitations in the NFL. So I'm really looking forward to seeing where his career goes from here, and was glad to see him get all the way to the Super Bowl and have a very successful season on the Eagles defense, and be fun to pair two Wisconsin linebackers together. Two guys who briefly crossed paths in college. I don't know that they were ever they certainly weren't starters or anything together, but I believe they were both at the University of Wisconsin at the same time, just kind of a freshman senior type deal. So some familiarity there as well. And I think there's some real linebacker talent here, some real upside, some young guys at linebacker that can be more than just 1 year fillers like Nick Morrow was this past season, and give you some of the athletic tools that you're missing by not having Roquan Smith anymore. One other former Flame to keep the Valentine's Day theme together here, Bobby Okereke from the Indianapolis Colts. I'm never sure if I'm actually saying that last name correctly, but a tackling machine in that Colts defense for Matt Eberflus. Always sort of the second fiddle to Shaquille Leonard in that defense. And so, he certainly, I think, benefited at times from having a running mate there. And I don't think he's like this stud linebacker, right? He's never been a Pro Bowler, but he's always been pretty good. He bites too hard on play action, and sometimes he'll miss some tackles, right? I mean, he's got flaws like any other linebacker, but he knows this defense. He's got, by all accounts, a just good rapport with the coaching staff, some leadership skills there, and a guy that you can plug into the middle here that's not going to be, one of the top-end expensive linebackers in quite that same way as maybe a guy like Edmonds that has the flashier upside, the flashier skill set, et cetera, et cetera. Akirke is not that same level of size or speed, but just a guy who knows how to find the football. You know what I mean? He just is always around the ball one way or another, and it's those kind of traits you also can't teach. Even it's just like the physical traits you can't teach. You can't necessarily teach that exact instinct and knack for the football, but Akirke has that familiarity, and you wonder if Matt Eberflus will dip into that and say, let's get a linebacker who knows this system, who could be here for a while and stabilize that position and be that sort of leader in this middle of the defense. Or, they want to go more of the traits with one of these other guys to say, screw it, we could teach these guys this defense. They'll figure it out. Let's get the big, strong, fast guys that we got rid of in Roquan Smith, but this way at a much, much more affordable pace, and presumably all of those guys having agents and being more reasonable to negotiate with as a result of that. So it's kind of a broad overview of some of these free agents that the Bears should fall in love with this Valentine's Day. Like we said, some of those guys might not end up being options for the Bears, but let's fall in love with them anyway. Let's get excited about it, because I would rather have that excitement and have a little disappointment when they're not available than never get excited about it at all and just sit here and be like, oh, the Bears aren't going to get any good players this year and they're going to keep being bad. Who wants to do that? That sucks. Like, who wants to live that way? Like, we're going to live excited about what the possibilities might hold for the future. Certainly, whenever we get any kind of updates on major players that could be connected to the Bears, you can be sure we'll break it all down for you right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to podcasts. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Don't forget to check out the Locked On Bears YouTube channel as well to keep up with our video podcasts. Leave us a comment on those, like them, hit subscribe, hit the bell to make sure that you're getting all of the notifications for our new videos as well. And thank you, wherever you watch or listen, for making Locked On Bears your first listen today, especially on Valentine's Day, a day of love. And I appreciate you showing me the love by listening and tuning in. If you're looking for your second listen, I got to be on today's episode of Locked On NFL with Luke Braun from Locked On Vikings. We kind of went through the Super Bowl over the weekend and tried to poke holes in some of the common narratives coming out of the game and offer some alternatives to what we saw on Sunday and why maybe not everyone is talking about it or thinking about the game too critically. That we're so quick to accept the narrative that kind of comes out of it and say, well, was it actually that way? Or, were the Eagles really one play away from it not being a Chiefs dynasty anymore? And all of a sudden, the Chiefs actually ran the ball more effectively than they passed the ball in the second half. They were more successful rushing than passing. We tried to flip some of those narratives on their head a little bit and get a deeper understanding of what we saw in the Super Bowl. So go check out Locked On NFL now for your second listen. Come on back tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Bears and another opportunity for you to bear down.